he was just hard. He was long, could never get his shot.
Kevin Garnett has gone toe-to-toe with the best players in NBA history. He's battled Kobe Bryant in wars of pride and willpower. He's faced LeBron James in high-stakes playoff duels where every possession felt like a chess match. He's clashed with Tim Duncan, the big fundamental, over and over in the Western Conference. And of course, he's stood in the paint against Shaquille O'Neal, the most dominant big man of his era. With a resume like that, you'd expect that when Garnett is asked to name the toughest player he ever faced, the answer would be one of those Hall of Fame titans. But here's the shocking truth. It wasn't Kobe, it wasn't Duncan, it wasn't LeBron, and it wasn't even Shaq. When Kevin Garnett finally revealed the name, fans were stunned. The toughest player he ever faced was Rasheed Wallace. Yes, Rasheed, the fiery forward with the headband, the attitude, and the infamous "ball don't lie" catchphrase. And that revelation tells us more about the nature of toughness in the NBA than almost any stat sheet or highlight reel ever could. But why Rasheed Wallace? What made him the nightmare even Kevin Garnett admitted he couldn't solve? That's the story we're about to unfold, and trust me, it only gets crazier the deeper we go. When Kevin Garnett finally revealed the name of the toughest player he ever faced, it wasn't just an answer, it was a revelation that sent shockwaves through NBA circles. Garnett had built a career on intensity, fearlessness, and an unshakable confidence that made him one of the most intimidating forces to ever step on the hardwood. He had matched up against Kobe Bryant in late-game duels that felt more like heavyweight title fights. He had battled Tim Duncan in countless wars of patience and precision, where every move was like a chess piece sliding across the board. He had even stood toe-to-toe with Shaquille O'Neal, the man who bent the league to his will with brute force. With a resume like that, most fans thought they already knew the answer. Surely it had to be Kobe, maybe Duncan, possibly Shaq. But when the question was put to him who was the toughest matchup of his career, Garnett leaned forward, paused, and with no hesitation said, Rasheed Wallace.
My toughest cover was probably Rasheed Wallace. No disrespect to Timmy.
The room fell silent. Rasheed Wallace? Not the four-time MVP Duncan? Not the scoring assassin Kobe? Not the most dominant big man of all time in Shaq? Instead, Garnett pointed to a player who, at least on the surface, was remembered as much for his fiery temper and league-leading technical fouls as for his actual production. To some, it sounded like a joke, almost like KG was trolling the question. But Garnett wasn't smiling. He meant it. And the more he explained, the more it made sense. Rasheed Wallace wasn't just another opponent. He was a puzzle that couldn't be solved. At 6'11" with a long wingspan, Sheed could bang with you inside, step outside to hit threes, and still move his feet well enough to defend multiple positions. He wasn't confined to one style of play. If you tried to muscle him, he'd finesse you. If you tried to outthink him, he'd beat you with instinct. And if you thought you could rattle him, you quickly learned that Rasheed was the one who did the rattling. What set Sheed apart wasn't just skill, it was the unpredictability. Night after night, Garnett could prepare for Kobe's relentless scoring, for Duncan's surgical fundamentals, or for Shaq's sheer physical dominance. But Rasheed, you never knew what you were getting. One night, he'd stretch the floor with deep jumpers. Next, he'd dominate the post with that silky turnaround. And all the while, he carried himself with a confidence that even KG couldn't crack. Garnett admitted it outright. Rasheed Wallace was the one player he couldn't control. That admission speaks volumes. Because Garnett wasn't just another star, he was the master of control, of dictating pace, energy, and emotion in every game he played. He prided himself on breaking opponents mentally before breaking them physically. But with Sheed, the roles were reversed. He was unpredictable, unshakable, and unafraid. So when Kevin Garnett, one of the fiercest warriors the NBA has ever known, gives that kind of respect not to an MVP, not to a scoring champion, not even to a finals MVP, but to Rasheed Wallace, you know there's something much deeper at play. It wasn't about trophies. It wasn't about numbers. For Garnett, this was about survival. That's the truth that unfolded. Rasheed Wallace was the storm Garnett could never fully weather, and Rasheed couldn't be more thankful to play alongside KG.
Now, myself and KG, I was thankful enough to be.
So let's break it down. Why Rasheed Wallace? What made him stand out in a league filled with icons like Duncan, Dirk, Kobe, and Shaq? The answer lies in a rare combination of size, skill, and adaptability. In the past, he always singled out other players as his toughest matchup.
Was damn near unstoppable.
At 6'11", Wallace had the frame of a traditional big man. He could bang in the post, back you down, and score over either shoulder with a smooth turnaround jumper. But unlike most bigs of his era, Sheed could also step out to the perimeter and knock down shots with confidence. Long before stretch bigs became the standard in the NBA, Rasheed was quietly laying the blueprint. His mid-range jumper was deadly smooth, quick, and consistent. And when he drifted out to the three-point line, defenders had no idea how to handle him. Play up close, and he'd drive past you. Sag off, and he'd make you pay with a jumper. But his game wasn't just about scoring. On defense, Wallace was a nightmare. His length and wingspan allowed him to alter shots. His timing was impeccable, and his ability to switch onto smaller players without looking lost was years ahead of the NBA's defensive trends. He wasn't just effective against traditional post players. He could guard perimeter threats too, something that made him invaluable during deep playoff runs. Then came the unpredictability. Some nights, Wallace was the go-to scorer, dropping buckets from every angle. Other nights, he became the defensive anchor, shutting down lanes and protecting the rim. Add to that his trash talk the way he got inside your head before you even touched the ball, and you start to understand why Kevin Garnett put him above the rest. Imagine trying to guard a man who could bully you inside, stretch you outside, and defend you just as effectively on the other end, all while jawing at you nonstop. That was Rasheed Wallace. He wasn't just tough to play against, he was exhausting. Fans today often look back in disbelief, calling him ahead of his time. And the truth is, if Rasheed played in today's NBA, where shooting bigs are celebrated and versatility is gold, he wouldn't just fit in, he'd dominate. Rasheed never fails to explain how great Kevin Garnett is, too.
So just to pick one or two guys when there was an era of...
To really understand why Kevin Garnett singled out Rasheed Wallace, you have to go back to their actual battles. These weren't just regular season matchups, they were all-out wars. In the early 2000s, Garnett's Minnesota Timberwolves and Wallace's Portland Trail Blazers were two Western Conference teams built on grit, and every time they met, sparks flew. KG relied on his endless motor, his length, and his intensity to impose his will, but Wallace was one of the rare players who refused to be intimidated. With smooth footwork, a silky mid-range jumper, and an inside-out game that kept defenders guessing, Sheed answered every punch Garnett threw. Possession after possession, they went back and forth, neither man willing to blink first. When Garnett later moved to the Boston Celtics and Wallace became a cornerstone of the Detroit Pistons, their rivalry only intensified. The stakes were higher, the spotlight brighter. In the 2008 Eastern Conference battles, every rebound felt like a skirmish for pride. Every bucket was a declaration of superiority. Fans could feel the energy pouring through the screen, jawing, shoves, stares, and buckets that meant more than just points on the scoreboard. Even now, highlight compilations of those duels garner thousands of comments from fans who recognize what they witnessed. Pure, unfiltered competition. This was real basketball, one viewer wrote. And that's exactly what it was. Two alphas, two warriors. Here's the thing. Rasheed Wallace's greatness wasn't just about his physical gifts. What truly separated him was his mentality. Kevin Garnett built his career on intensity. He was the league's ultimate trash talker, the guy who stared opponents down, clapped in their faces, and tried to break their confidence before the ball was even tipped. Yet even Garnett admitted that Rasheed was different, one of the few players who could turn that same energy back on him. Not Tim Duncan's quiet dominance, and certainly not Kevin Garnett's mind games. If anything, Wallace thrived in those psychological battles. His trash talk was sharp, his confidence unwavering, and his unpredictability unnerving. He could drop 30 points on you without saying a word, or he could needle you with relentless chatter until you lost your composure. Either way, he owned the moment. And then there's his most iconic mantra, "Ball don't lie." Every time an opponent missed a free throw after what Wallace believed was a bad call, he'd let those three words fly. It wasn't just a catchphrase, it was his declaration of truth. His way of saying the game itself would reveal fairness better than any referee. That phrase has lived on for years, symbolizing Sheed's fearless and unapologetic nature. For Garnett, that edge was impossible to ignore. KG could intimidate most players, but Rasheed? He was untouchable. In fact, there were times when Wallace was the one getting under Garnett's skin, flipping the script on the NBA's most relentless trash talker. Paired with his skill is what made Sheed unforgettable. He wasn't just a tough matchup. He was the rare opponent who could outthink you, outplay you, and outpsych you all in the same game. It wasn't just Kevin Garnett who gave Rasheed Wallace that respect. Across the NBA, some of the biggest names, the ones who defined an entire generation of basketball, openly admitted the same thing. Sheed was a nightmare matchup. He didn't always dominate box scores, but he left an impression that stayed with players long after the final buzzer. Shaquille O'Neal, a man who bulldozed through almost every big man of his era, once admitted that Rasheed Wallace was one of the toughest players he ever had to deal with. What made that statement powerful is that Shaq rarely gave out that kind of credit. He praised Sheed's versatility, the way he could drag centers out of the paint with his jumper, then punish them inside with post moves. Even Shaq, the most dominant force of the 2000s, recognized that Wallace forced him to work. Then there was Kobe Bryant. But Rasheed Wallace played a massive role in flipping that script. Kobe later admitted that Sheed's length, defensive IQ, and unselfishness anchored Detroit's defense in ways that made the Lakers uncomfortable all series long. Without Wallace, that upset doesn't happen. Chauncey Billups, Wallace's teammate on that Pistons squad, has been even more direct. He's said it multiple times without hesitation. "We don't win that championship without Sheed." For Billups, Wallace was the missing piece, the guy who gave Detroit just enough offense to balance the floor and just enough edge to break the Lakers' confidence. When you put all those voices together, Shaq, Kobe, Billups, Garnett, Rasheed Wallace may not have the resume of a traditional all-time great. He didn't rack up MVPs or lead the league in scoring, but among the people who actually shared the court with him, his reputation was cemented. He was unpredictable, versatile, and relentless. For the legends who battled against him and the teammates who won with him, one truth remains the same. Rasheed Wallace was the kind of player you did not want to see lining up across from you on game night. That's the complicated part of the story. If Rasheed Wallace was so tough, so respected, why isn't he remembered as one of the all-time greats? Why does his name rarely come up in those GOAT conversations? The truth is, Sheed's career was as volatile as his personality. He spent his early years in Portland with the infamous Jail Blazers, a team that was talented but plagued by controversy. He racked up technical fouls at a record pace. It wasn't until he was traded to Detroit that everything clicked. Sheed became the missing piece that transformed a very good team into a champion. In 2004, Detroit stunned the basketball world by taking down the heavily favored Lakers in the finals. Wallace's defense, shooting, and leadership were crucial. He wasn't the finals MVP that honor went to Chauncey Billups, but make no mistake, Sheed was the heartbeat. Analysts often say that if Wallace had fully embraced being a superstar, he could have been a perennial All-NBA player. Instead, he was content to play within the team system, to blend his brilliance into the fabric of the game. That selflessness, combined with his volatility, made his career one of the great NBA what-ifs. Today, when Kevin Garnett's revelation about Rasheed Wallace makes the rounds online, fans can't get enough. On Twitter, one fan wrote, "KG choosing Sheed is the ultimate respect real hoopers know." Another fan added, "Rasheed was Jokic before Jokic." On TikTok, highlight reels of Sheed's mid-range game and defensive stops rack up millions of views, with Gen Z fans finally starting to understand what older heads have been saying for years. Rasheed Wallace was special, and on YouTube, comment sections under KG interviews are filled with agreement. One fan put it simply, "If KG calls you the toughest, that's your Hall of Fame ballot right there. The wave of respect is stronger now than ever." Rasheed Wallace might not have been appreciated in his prime, but thanks to the words of legends like Garnett, fans are finally giving him his flowers. When you take a step back, it becomes clear that every NBA era has its own version of Rasheed Wallace, a player whose greatness isn't fully reflected in box scores or award lists, but whose presence reshaped games and haunted opponents. In the 90s, that figure was Dennis Rodman. He wasn't a scorer, but his defense, rebounding, and unmatched ability to crawl into his opponents' minds made him one of the most disruptive forces the game had ever seen. Rodman's value wasn't in points, it was in chaos, intensity, and psychological edge. Fast forward to today, and you could argue that Draymond Green carries that torch. Like Wallace, he's volatile yet brilliant, capable of guarding every position, directing traffic on defense, and igniting an offense without needing to pour in 30 points. His fingerprints are all over Golden State's dynasty, just as Sheed's were on Detroit's 2004 championship run. For the 2000s, Wallace embodied that archetype. Rasheed Wallace might not have the numbers that scream all-time great, but when Kevin Garnett, the big ticket, the man who feared no one calls you the toughest he ever faced, that's a legacy carved in stone. Kevin Garnett battled giants. He went toe-to-toe with Shaq, Kobe, Duncan, Dirk, and LeBron. But the toughest fight of his career, that belonged to Rasheed Wallace, the unpredictable, unstoppable force who left even KG admitting defeat. If Kevin Garnett, one of the fiercest competitors the league has ever seen, says it, then maybe it's time we all reevaluate just how great Rasheed Wallace truly was. So let me ask you, was Rasheed Wallace the most underrated player in NBA history? Or did KG just see something in him the rest of us missed? Drop your thoughts below because this conversation is far from over. Just remember, if Kevin Garnett's toughest opponent wasn't Kobe, Duncan, or LeBron, then what else are we overlooking about NBA greatness?